Part 17. Settling the Waters of Commerce. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was debt. The other key tenet of religion is the concept of original debt, which is the actual meaning of the reference to original sin. Sin was one of the various names applied to the goddess or feminine principle. Sin thus became synonymous first with the sanctity of creation itself, having to do with the actual fecundity and creative capacity of the earth from whence comes all life as we know it. Later this became the worldwide meme for alienation and separation from the religiously imposed law of the priest. The earth produces life, nourishes life, and sustains life. If we are to establish the a priori sanctity and sacredness of all life, then the feminine principle of creation is worthy of the reference as the sacred feminine, which throughout known history has been suppressed, subjugated, and oftentimes obliterated. By the linguistic play utilizing the function of transposition, the word sin, that started out as a name of such principle, has been transposed to become something evil, lesser than, or even demonic. This has taught the world's population to polarize itself with the earth and with life, to treat the body and sexuality as sinful and evil, and to thereby be subrogated to the purported principle that supposedly brings life forth. To be subrogated means to be under the burden of a debt that has been paid by a surety. In this case, the debt of being given life places us under the eternal burden of debt to the purported provider thereof. Many refer to that purported principle as God. But by a vast account of empirical evidence, no God of any merit would ever allow the destruction of life to the degree that we see all around us to be perpetuated in its name. This is not a God of creation. It is a God of death. This is a principle that has come to be infused into so-called scriptures, within which such writings have been given the classification of divine law and beyond question. Thus, the gift of life conveyed by a purported supreme creator known as God carries with it an obligation, and that obligation is considered a debt. In this context, for us to live here on this earth is to take upon ourselves the presumption of guilt and the presumption of obligatory debt. In this God's reality, we are born in sin, and we are born in debt, and what's more, a debt that can never be repaid. In this context, it is not a hard stretch to reach the conclusion that every drop of water and every breath of air that sustains life are the things that must be paid for, and no matter how much we pay, the debt can never be repaid, because we owe our soul to the company store. One of the most important writers and researchers of our time, Joseph P. Farrell, provides a comprehensive presentation of how this has been put together over the millennia in his books Financial Vipers of Venice and Babylon Banksters. On page 122 of the first book, he quotes a perfect example of where this primordial debt is embedded in all religions, where in the ancient Brahmic texts, the Satapatha Brahmana, it states, "In being born, every being is born as debt owed to the gods, the saints, the fathers, and to men." In every manner of language, word, and metaphor, we are submerged under the waters of commerce, deep in debt, swimming in a perpetual sea of sin, lost in a tsunami of emotional turbulence, whereby our heart is forever burdened with the guilt of simply living life, a guilt and burden from which there is never to be reprieve or escape. At least, that is what the world system and religious bondage and commercial prison would like us to believe, and by our belief, continue to create. But since we did in fact create it by our allowance of the myriad of presumptions of consent and voluntary compliance, we can also uncreate it and take command of the tools by which the waters of commerce are settled and the burdensome obligations are returned to whence they came and to whom they belong. We must resolve that which we have created. Matthew 8 through 22. Let the dead tend to the dead. In the above quote taken from the New Testament, the Master instructs the disciple to leave the world of the dead behind and let the dead take care of themselves. We have established herein that the world of debt bondage is the world of the dead, created, held, and controlled by a global cult of death that has been created in our world over thousands of years. There is a keeper at the gate who will not let us pass if we are burdened with such encumbrances. In this section of the book of Matthew, the Master shows the disciples the way out of bondage and the cult of death, which is to settle the waters of commerce under our own vessel. We are in fact the master when we merge our substance with our being, as has been discussed herein. Yet when we allow an external authority to presume control over our being, we become submerged under the waters of commerce and debt, as well as we project our true mastery outside of ourselves and seek an external savior, which in fact only serves to bind us to the law of the priest. In that status, we are the slave and not the master. The world system as the matrix is the master. We are the bonded surety when we allow ourselves to be polarized between the cathode and anode of the electrical system of charge and discharge, where monetized debt flows through the banks as current with ourselves as the debtor and the godlike AI matrix as the creditor. This is why every event in the commercial arena is called a charge, and why, when we are brought into one of the world system courts, we are overlaid with charges. On the public side, the charge is applied to the franchise, and it requires the extraction of the personal life force to discharge the debt. But it is in fact never paid, because the monetary unit used for that purpose is also a debt. Preceding the above-quoted verse, the storyline narrates that many beings in disease are pleading with the Master to heal them. In so doing, they are demonstrating that they are not truly standing in life as masters of their own destiny. He tells them to heal themselves and then proceeds to show them how. After this, one of the disciples states he must go to attend his dying father, and the Master says, quote, "Let the dead tend to the dead and follow me." End quote. Immediately following this, the disciples and Master are all in a boat on the water. The boat is the metaphor for a vessel in commerce. The weather stirs up because being in such a vessel without a rudder, without will, atop turbulent seas, is to be controlled by one's own fear of lack and limitation, fear of survival, fear of negative consequences, fear of losing control of one's vessel and being submerged under the waters of debt. At the same time as the weather stirs, the waters underneath the vessel become unsettled. This is our state in life as we are controlled by external forces and turbulent emotions, manifested as the unsettled waters of commercial debt that threaten our very survival on a daily basis. In trying to settle the waters, we are seeking outside of ourselves a master to tell us what to do and to heal our diseases. In the storyline, the disciples are unable to stop the fear as represented by the stormy weather. They are unable to settle the waters beneath their ship. They are lost at sea. When we continue through this life as a bonded surety, we are as an apparition in a ghost ship lost at sea in a vessel in commerce, not under our own command. We are as the dead in a realm of the dead, and a world built on lies, deception, and fictions taken for truth. We have no will, and thus we cannot control our emotions, our lives, or the ship upon which we sail. We have accepted the lie of original debt and debt enslavement in a body convicted to the inevitability of death and the tomb. DEBT equals debt, enslavement, body, tomb. Unsettled waters are the equivalent of commercial bondage, surety attachment, and perpetual debt, whether in the body or not. If and when one contracts to be the surety, then the creditor controls the game board at all levels. Upon death, the system takes over the equitable estate and waits 3 years for the final abandonment of the estate, so that the debts and bonds attached thereto are extinguished and the remainder interests revert and escheat back to the estate. Our true being, on the other hand, having died without settlement of the underlying waters of commerce while in the body, encased in the similitude of life, can thereafter be energetically attached to karmic debt that can be offloaded by those beings controlling the game board. All the while we have spent our entire life chasing after the karma tokens of the gods of the Matrix, a thoroughly meaningless and fruitless existence to be sure. Upon death we remain bonded to the karma of such as would be gods, and we are then theirs to recycle and return for another endless round of fruitless endeavors, chasing after endless cycles of debt and death. How do you suppose, for all these millennia and eons of time, this world has been controlled by beings that perpetrate heinous crimes and mass murder through war, poverty, starvation, and disease without consequences? The answer is because they are the puppets of higher dimensional masters who can shuffle karmic debt around and place such karmic burden on the hapless volunteers who are in a state of perpetually dying. Since they hold the keys, controls, and codes of the system, they can swap out the debt that they have extracted from the abandoned estate and replace it with their own karma so that we, the living, are bound and gagged into endless cycles of debt and karma and subjugation, while they, in the embrace of their false godhead, seemingly walk free. All of this is done by our own free will choice to pledge ourselves to the debt burden in a cosmic game of mortgage and pledges of death. Yet, when we reverse all of this, as is our sovereign capacity to do, we clear our own ledger by resolving our karma and ancestral lineage and genetic misappropriations, and these so-called gods then must face themselves and pay their own bills. We do not have to continue to stand as surety to their karmic debt. Proverbs 11:15. He who is guarantor for a stranger will surely suffer for it, but he who hates being a guarantor is secure. Proverbs 17:18. A man lacking in sense pledges and becomes guarantor in the presence of his neighbor. Proverbs 22:26 through 27. Do not be among those who give pledges, among those who become guarantors for debts. Ultimately, we are all the beneficiaries, not the sureties. We are the living embodiment of the eternal equitable estate of our own lives. But having sovereign free will, we are also capable of contracting such an equitable estate away for a handful of counterfeit silver coins. We have allowed ourselves to be the sureties to the public debt, and we have abrogated our right to claim our estate and regain our standing. We are supposed to be the living beneficiaries of the global estate, this world that is ours, this world that we have created in co-creative alignment with a creative power that is primary yet equal, no matter how any individual being chooses to define that source or power. We are the beneficiaries of life. What we've done is accepted limited beneficial use, Sesta K Trust status, by contractual agreement. And instead of remaining the true owners, we are now the tenants. We do not have real title to our automobiles, our homes, even our bodies and our children. Instead, we have accepted deeds of trust and certificates of title because the state has control of our substance as the executor of the abandoned estate, empowered to collect rents from the tenants perpetually. We have accepted civil privileges by selling our substantive rights for 30 pieces of silver or a handful of beads. We get the privilege of use. We pay the taxes for the benefit of using their private paper and their property, and oh, so much more. The rabbit hole goes very deep indeed, Alice. As the Sesta K Trust, we have civil rights of limited beneficial use while true title remains with the executors of the estate holding title by right of military conquest. This limited beneficial use is referred to as the usufruct, which, as previously stated, is a word derived from the Latin usus, from which we have the words use, usury, usage. Thus, use is usury. Payment of interest is the payment of use tax. Payment of income tax is the payment of use tax. All taxes are use taxes based on the principles of usufruct. Because of the way the entire world system is set up, a bonded surety who is the Sesta K Trust must be licensed to participate in commerce and must pay a tax as the usufruct user. The second part of the word is derived from fructus, which is Latin for fruit. Usufruct is the right to use the fruit of someone else's creation. In our status, we have allowed the estate to be the usufructory trustee to retain title to the fruits of our labor, while having to pay a usufruct use tax to use the things we create, because they are overlaid by the bonded debt to which we are bound. Nifty, ain't it? If this is confusing, don't feel alone. It is designed to be maximally confusing so that few can make their way through the labyrinth and maze of it all to find clarity and comprehension. But be advised, all who believe they cannot see or understand, indeed cannot see or understand. Those that know they can truly see can and will do so. It may take time, but that time is the path of self-transformation by removing the mind shackles of our self-induced prison. In that process, we will transform the world in our own image, that of free and eternally creative beings with unlimited capacity and a world of unlimited potential. Essentially, usury and commerce are the two things that are illegal in the world system. Just by breathing, we are considered criminals now that the air is claimed to be owned by the estate. We must be licensed to use that which belongs to the state. Usufruct means to have use of something that belongs to somebody else. When title belongs to somebody else, as in a corporate estate, then we get usufruct as a limited beneficiary, the Sesta K Trust. On top of that, we volunteer to be a registered agent to receive service of process in the form of tax bills, utility bills, debt service bills, mortgages, fee agreements, charges, court-issued civil complaints, and criminal indictments. On the latter, the court issues such complaints under the signature of the clerk, who is the cleric, the priest. He or she issues a summons to appear, and as dutiful ghosts being summoned to a séance, we appear as an apparition. When we go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get a license for the first time, we are at one and the same time volunteering to be the registered agent as well as confessing to being a driver in interstate commerce. Commerce is fully controlled by the United States Congress through its constitutional authority to regulate interstate commerce. This was attached to the vehicles, persons, cargo, goods, and passengers of commercial drivers per the Genesee Chief Decision of 1851. The DMV, of course, is the Department of Transportation, which handles vessels of commercial bodies at sea that have been transposed to being vehicles on land pursuant to the 1851 decision quoted earlier in the Propeller Genesee case. And we must obtain the license for the privilege to use those commercial vessels, defined as motor vehicles. To do what? To create public funds within and under public policy. That's what. Those public funds are debts, commercial paper created against the Sestake Trust, the corporate franchise controlled by public policy. And those pieces of debt-bonded paper create public funds as circulating currency, so-called money. At the end of the storyline in Matthew 8:22, after the disciples in futility admit they are powerless to settle the waters of their own commercial bondage, they turn to the Master and ask for help. They have failed in the task of knowing who they are and can only project their own power and authority onto something outside of themselves. That something then steps up and calms the waters by settling the claims, liabilities, and bonds of the waters underneath the vessel, where the disciples have previously cowered in fear of drowning in debt. While they tarried in fear and hesitation, the Master was asleep, indicating that when in fear, drowning in debt, bonded to commercial burdens, there is no Master present. We are asleep. So the question is, are you a slave cowering in fear while your internal master sleeps? Or are you ready to take the steps to settle the commercial waters of your own creation and become the master? Any other interpretation of this and the rest of the story of the Master is nothing more than adhering to more of the lies. There is no external Savior coming to alleviate your fears or your burdens or your sin. Only each one of us can do that for ourselves. In the end, every single being in this world must face themselves, and as the guy on the street corner is shouting, with placard in hand and in need of a bath as metaphor for cleansing oneself of the illusions of the debt waters of commerce, the end is nigh.